which is translated as often repeated. It comes from the verb thana yafni, which actually means to double or to bend something, to fold something, to fold. These meanings, keep this in your mind. To double, to bend, to fold. So when you fold clothes, right? You wrap it, one part of it over the other, you're folding it, right? You're bending it. That is the word, that's the root word, and it comes from thana, to bend, to fold, to double over. So when somebody bends also, this verb can be used, and he's bending. And from that root word comes the word ithnain. Everybody knows that, right? Ithnain, what is it? Ithnain? Ithnain means two, right? So that's the bending, the doubling. So that's where you get the word two from. Ithnain or ithnain. Now you can either bend forward or you can bend backwards also, right? You can bend forward and you can bend backwards. So how is this related to the Quran? This is a description of the Quran. And what does that mean? Everything, if you look at the meanings of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always speaks about things in pairs. He compares things. He doubles things, and when he mentions one thing, he mentions the other also, perhaps the opposite, or something similar to it, something maybe contrasting with it. Two things always come together. When look at the entire Quran, it is like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about, for example, he gives amr and nahi. What is amr and what is nahi? Commands and prohibitions, right? There are commands in the Quran to do certain things, nahi, prohibitions not to do certain things, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about iman and kufr, right? Allah speaks about the mu'mineen and the kafirin. And you will find that whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about iman, it is followed by a discussion on kufr. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the believers, the mu'mineen, he also follows that up by talking about the kafirin. Or when he talks about the kafirin, he follows that up by talking about the mu'mineen. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about tawheed, about the oneness of Allah, he also talks about shirk. And so on. Everything is double. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the hasanat, he also talks about the sayyi'at, right? The good deeds and the bad deeds. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the dunya, he also talks about the akhirah. When he mentions the akhirah and mentions it perhaps as a promise to the believers, people who do good deeds and so on, he also follows that up with a mention of the reward and punishment, right? He mentions the thawab and iqab, the reward and punishment. So if he mentions the reward for the believers, he will also mention the punishment for the disbelievers, or the good people, and the reward for the good things that they do, and the punishment for the bad people and the bad things that they do. You'll find the entire Quran like that. And there are many things that are doubled like that. Many things that come in pair. Things that are always generally mentioned in pair. And we find that, as a basic teaching in Islam, including in the Shahada that we recite. Right? La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. There is a negation and there is an affirmation. A negation and affirmation. This is how the entire book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And of course everything is consistent. Allah mentions in this book, Kitaban Mutashabiha, a book the entirety of the book, the entire book resembles itself, right? Parts of it resemble the other parts. That is why it is called mutashabih. Every parts of it resembles it in the way that it discusses things, with this pairing of concepts, and it resembles it in the consistency. There's no contradiction and so on in it. There are other meanings concerning the word mutashabih. But the word mathani, these things double every dimension of something, and then the mention of the opposite of it, or the mention of something that will pair with it in some way or the other. If we understood that concept, then we'll see it is one of the unique things of the book, of the entire Quran. There is no other book that is like that. Human beings don't think like that, and they don't write like that. There is no book like that, which mentions everything in that double way, pairing things together. And in Arabic also there is a saying, تُعْرَفُ الْأَشْيَاءُ بِأَضْدَادِهَا. Things are known by their opposites. You get to understand something clearly, or at least more clearly, when you think about the opposite of it. What is the opposite of it? And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches. He teaches us the thing, He teaches us what is Iman, and He teaches us what is not Iman, what is Kufr. He teaches us what is Tawheed, and He teaches us what is not Tawheed, what is Shirk, and so on. So that is running throughout the entire Quran. That is how it is. Do we find this in Al-Fatiha? In Surah Al-Fatiha, do we find this methodology? Yes, it is there. And if we were to judge, some the scholars have pointed out that the mention of things is doubled in Al-Fatiha. So mention of things, just the mention. First, before we look at the meanings, things are doubled in the mention. Allah mentions Allah, His name. He mentions actually His name followed by two attributes in the Basmala. Now we're not, of course, discussing whether Al-Basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, whether that's part of Surah Al-Fatiha or not. Leave that discussion aside. That's a big difference among the scholars and so on. Nevertheless, whenever we recite Al-Fatiha, we started by saying Bismillah, right? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So when we started, we are mentioning Allah, the name Allah, and we are mentioning Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And that is immediately followed by what? Allah, Alhamdulillah. So Allah is mentioned again, and Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Double, right? So Allah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim is double. So between Bismillah and the next two ayat of Surah Al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Double. What else is double in the surah? Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. Iyaka wa iyaka. Right? Double. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم صراط right? Double. So we find this concept in Al-Fatiha in terms of the words themselves, and in terms of the meanings. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Tawheed, He mentions about Himself. Always, at the back of our mind should come the idea of Shirk. The contrast to Tawheed is what it is Shirk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself, meaning that He is so and so, He is not so and so. He is, Alhamdulillah, all praises for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we can negate, Alhamdu, the praise is not for anyone else. So there's an affirmation, and in the back of your mind there is a negation. Rabbal Alameen, He is the Lord of the worlds. Nobody else is the Lord of the worlds. Only Allah. So affirmation and negation at the same time, and so on, right? So you go through the entire surah like that. So whether it is talking about Tawheed, or it is talking about the good people and the bad people, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, which صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, the ones who, the path of those whom you have blessed. And what is the opposite of that? The path of, not the path of those whom you are angry with, or those who have gone astray. So there is a contrast, right? So the entire surah is like that. This is how the entire surah talks to us, right? So we see that doubling very clearly in the surah, or pairing and contrasting and so on in the surah. And as I mentioned, it is not found in any other book. No other book discusses the topic. And of course, books are basically written by human beings, right? People don't think like that, and they don't discuss things like that, except in rare situations. The other thing, a couple of other things I want to mention in relation to the names of Al-Fatiha. The name Al-Fatiha itself, Al-Fatiha, the opening. Why is it called the opening? Well, you will always find this explanation, which is correct, that it comes in the beginning of the book, of the Quran. So it opens the book, more or less, right? It is the opener. Al-Fatiha literally means the opener, the thing that opens, or what opens. So it opens the book, it comes in the beginning of the book, or it is like the introduction to the book. But can it have any other meaning beside that? And of course, introducing and beginning and opening and so on, all of that is the same. And you even in Salah, you recite that first, and then you would recite any other surah after that. But how else does it open? If we are thinking about what we recite, what we are reciting, the meanings of it, it should also open our minds. We talk about the opening up of minds, and Al-Fatiha does that. That is, but we have to make the effort. We have to try to understand what it is saying. It opens our minds to the rest of the Quran, towards understanding what the Quran says. Since it is a summary, it is the gist of the Quran, it is the essence of the Quran, it is you can say the source also, Quran and so on. It gives you, so if you think about what Al-Fatiha says, then the rest of the Quran, looking at the rest of the Quran, the meanings of it and so on, should come naturally, or should come easily, because Al-Fatiha has already introduced it to us. So there is a symbolic meaning also in the term opening. The opening up of minds, the opening up of hearts, the opening up of our souls, and the opening up of our intellects. The intellect, if a person's intellectually he is closed, he can't understand anything, right? He won't be able to proceed from there. So there are also two other names that I wish to mention, and I'll do that only quickly. Ruqya, it is called Ruqya and Shifa, the cure and the healing. Both words have very similar meanings. Let's take them together, the cure and the healing. Right? It heals, it cures. And the Sahaba were able to discover, somehow they were able to discover that it can cure you of something physical. If there is a physical problem with you, it can cure you of that. Perhaps you are aware of that incident in the Sirah, where a group of the Sahaba were traveling. They went to a village and they were not given any hospitality. They wanted food and a place to rest and so on, and they were not given that in that place. So they camped outside of the village. During the night, the chief of the village was bitten by a scorpion, and nobody could cure him in the village. So they came out to the Muslims and asked them if they have a cure. And they said, the chief, the head of the Muslims, the leader, the Amir of them, he said, yes, but you didn't give us any hospitality, so they made a bargain. and then he came and he recited Al-Fatiha, and the chief of the village was cured. And they went back to the Prophet ﷺ and told him this. He said, how did you know it was ruqya? It is a ruqya. So he affirmed that. The Prophet ﷺ affirmed it, that Al-Fatiha, it is ruqya, it is a cure, it is a healing. So it is a physical cure, but it is much more than just a physical cure. It is a cure not only for the physical sicknesses and so on that a person may have, or anyone may have, but it is also a cure for the sicknesses of the heart, the intellectual sicknesses, and the spiritual sicknesses and so on. Al-Fatiha, it is ruqya, it is shifa. So intellectually, spiritually, and physically, in all ways, Al-Fatiha is a cure. Now, if the Sahaba were able to discover that, just imagine the potential that is there in the entire Quran. The entire Quran is shifa, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself mentions, right? The entire Quran is shifa. And we have not begun to discover that as yet. Right? We have not begun to discover how Al-Fatiha itself is shifa, or how it is ruqya, and how we should use it whenever problems confront us, or situations and sicknesses and so on confront us. If we were able to get that understanding, then what a powerful weapon we would have. What a powerful instrument. Not to use weapon, sometimes you think of it in a negative way, right? So if we don't use the word weapon, we say, okay, we have a powerful instrument by which you can do a lot of things, a lot of miracles can be done with it. So I end with that, really. These are just a few things about Al-Fatiha which we should be reflecting on daily when we recite it. Any questions? So next week, inshallah, we look at the two surahs together, Al-Mu'awwidhatayn, that is Al-Falaq wa Nas. We look at those two together, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك